Hi guys, this is Nadia from Valley Crafts, and today I want to show you how to create a double-sided star spinner. There's a separate tutorial for the helix and swirl spinner, so go check out my website or Etsy shop for those. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. I quite often make kits and PDF tutorials for the videos I put up on here, and I'll pop a link in the description below. I also have all sorts of gemstones, square and half round wire, some beads, and all sorts of other goodies on my website. So take a gander over and see if there's anything you fancy. Last but not least, come and join us in our wire wrappers and metalsmiths group on Facebook. I'll also pop a link below. Right, let's get started. Alright, so we're going to start by wrapping our wire around the first base wire. We're going to bring in the next wire, slide this above, and we're going to wrap around wire 1 and 2, come back down, add in a third wire, and line them up. And the important part is not to pull on the weaving wire too hard as you're doing it, otherwise you're going to compress the wires. Right, so wrap it round, slide in a third, or fourth rather, go around one more time, and then bring in a fifth wire. I think I might even go with 6, just to make it a little bit bigger. So we'll add in a 6th wire, like that, and as I said, the important part is not to pull too much, so you kind of lay the wires over the top and then kind of bring a pair of pliers and very gently flatten these out like that. And then on the way back, we're going to reverse what we've just done, and we're going to go around all wire 5, ignoring wire 6 because that is the only wire left at the top. Like that, bring it down, and then just make your way back down to the base. Open this up. Come in between here and just take your time with that. As I said, don't squeeze too hard. Come in between. Oh, I'm missing out one. Wrap around 3 wires like that, and then around the last wire like that. That's just to maintain the gap, and then we're going to squish this down, but ever so gently. You don't want to distort anything, like that. And that is what it should look like. We need to create the prong setting. Now for this I am using my flat nose pliers. They have different width nose, so you can create different size prong with them. The reason I like using them is because they are consistent. You always get a consistent gap between your prongs and a consistent prong shape, so you decide what size you need, and you will then use the prong accordingly, the tool accordingly. So what we need to do here is create prongs that are just long enough to kind of curve over the stone itself where it domes in, if that makes sense. So we don't need them too long so that they cover too much of the stone, but obviously they need to be long enough so that they hold the stone in place. And because there are quite a few of them, you don't actually need too much of a tight fit. Obviously the tighter the better, but because you've got quite a few, it holds the stone in place quite nicely. So you can see here I am using my flat nose pliers to shape the prong, sorry, a bit out of shot here, and then fold it back in on itself. So I've used the tool itself to kind of use that as a measurement guide, and I am now flattening the first prong with it, and then you can see that the prong is actually approximately the same width as the tool itself, and that's what I've used as a guide. So that's what it looks like so far, and again I'm using it as a guide to use as a spacing for the next prong. So basically the prongs are the same width as the spacing is wide, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. You get what I mean. So once I have created the first prong, I then move on and create the second prong using my flat nose pliers as a guide, again for the measurement, and I am then going to use it again. You can see here I'm bending it around the tool itself to get the same length of prong, and then I'm folding it around it. Bear in mind that the wire has a certain width to it, so you need to account for that when you're folding the wire over in itself, because it will add a little bit to the height of the prong. So just bear that in mind when you are creating these. You can see here this one is slightly longer, so I should have gone a little bit lower, but you get used to that once you've made a few. You can make a couple of practice ones first to get used to it. If you haven't pressed the wire completely down yet, you can adjust, but obviously this only works if the wire hasn't been marked in any way, because where you bend the wire it becomes very weak, and it can potentially break, and it's not worth the heartache if you have created, you know, all your prongs, set your stone, and then you do something, you fold the wire and it breaks, because that's a lot of work. You have to start again. Right, so we're going to start by binding all the wires together. So first of all, we're going to take one of the base wires and we're going to anchor our weaving wire. So leave about 30 centimeters to the left and just anchor your weaving wire with one wrap. So, and then we're going to pick up one of the wires that we have created the prongs on, and we're going to slide that in. So just close to the edge like that, and the longer side of the weaving wire we're going to be using that to wrap around it. So just once like that, and then we're going to keep adding in our base wires now. We need to make the base wide enough to hold 2 stones. So I'm going to show you in a second how to measure that out. So we're just going to slide in the base wire and then wrap the weaving wire around the base wire, traveling up like that. And I think I'll need about 3 in total in between each pronged wire, if that makes any sense, because that'll be enough spacing to hold 2 stones back to back. Slide that in, go around like that. You can see I broke this wire here, so I'm going to have to adjust the design a little bit. Let's see what I'm going to do. And the last one, bring that in. So the first wire and the last wire that I'm adding in here are going to be the platform for the stones to sit in. So we're going to attach this wire in every sort of third set of this weave. Okay, so now we have got all the wires attached. And now we need to travel back. So we're going to do exactly the same. So we're going to only do one wrap at the top here for this wire. We want to try and keep this as open and loose as possible, so because we need to bend this later. So on the way back, we're going to go around 2 wires at once. So I'm going to go in 3 wires down. So 1, 2, 3, like that. Wrap around the pronged wire. So now it's wrapped around 2. and we're going to go down in between wire 3 and 4 like that. So open that up, bring the weaving wire in, and then wrap it around wire I think that's 4 and 5, like that. Just had to double check that. Can't really see very well when I, there you go. Yeah, so open it up. I think I can't see if the weaver's gone in correctly, so I'm going to have to double check that. So bring the weaving wire in between wire 2 and 3, wrap it around wire 3 and 4, like that. It's a little bit fiddly here, I can't really see, like that. And then wrapping it around wire 2 and 3, like that. And then once around the last wire, and then the next 2 sets we're going to ignore wire 1 and the last wire, which I think is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're going to do 2 more sets of the same weave, just ignoring wire 1 and wire 7. Right, so I have created 3 more sets, and you can see here at the top I've attached it once, and I've brought the weaving wire out in the middle, so I'm around the 3rd wire in the middle. And now what we're going to do is bring in this pyramid weave we've done earlier, and we're going to be attaching it on top of that 3rd wire. So we're just going to lay it on top, and we're going to use a figure of 8 weave. So this is going to be a little bit fiddly, so I'm going to try and be as slow as possible. So I'm going to take the weaving wire, and obviously you want to go the opposite direction. So I'm going to go around the last wire of the pyramid weave. So bring that in, and you want to make sure that the end of the pyramid weave lines up with the center of the prong, because the rays are going to be sitting in the middle. So pull that in and be gentle, because the wire is delicate and it can break easily. Oops, it's going around wire 2. I don't want that. Only around the 1st wire. There we go. That's it. Okay. So now pull that in and make sure it lines up, and as you're pulling it in, it'll line up. And then we're going to go around the bottom wire once. You can kind of put a little kink on the side, that'll help you remember which wire it is. I'm going to go around it once and kind of pull that tight against it, and then you can swap hands, because we've already done one pyramid. It was difficult to kind of attach this wire. So then we can come around from this side and then wrap it, the weaving wire, around this 3rd wire in the middle, like that. Bend it, if necessary, just bend it apart a little bit. So bring it in, and all we're going to do is wrap it around the 3rd wire, like that. And then we're just going to continue with the weave. So that is going back down. You have to put the wires back in place. This is an extremely fiddly design because it's all in one go. So it's definitely not a beginner's piece. So what we need to do is also make sure that we attach the last wire, this one at the bottom again one more time, like that, before we travel back to the top. So we're going to ignore this ray and we're just going to continue with this block weave until we've reached the other prong, because then we're going to be attaching it again. So we're just going to continue with this weave up and down. We're going to ignore the wire. There's obviously no space anyway to attach, so the attachment points are going to be at each side of the pyramid, and that is roughly going to be where the prongs are lined up. So I'm going to do that and I'm going to show you, and it'll all make sense when you see what I've done. Right, so this is what it looks like. I've tied off these wires on the left hand side because it just makes it easier to handle. There's a lot of wires to hold on to. As I said, it's quite a tricky design. Okay, so what I've done is I've continued to weave the same weave that we've been doing from the start. I've continued it in between. Now the amount of weaves that you're going to make just depends on the distance between your prongs. So for mine, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, roughly 7 weaves in between. You're just going to have to adjust that just to fill that. And then for when it comes to the size of the, let's call it the ray, it's not quite as wide as the gap in between the prongs, but if you're going to make it wide enough, you're going to have to add another 2 or 3 wires on top, which is going to make it even more unmanageable than it already is. So what I've done instead is I've added 3 wraps on each side, and what that does, it kind of serves as a gap filler, so that when you attach the weaving wire from the prong base to the ray base, it kind of centers the ray in between the prongs. Now also what you can do, I found, is actually much better to also take the weaving wire from the rays itself and kind of give it a wrap around the middle wire as well. So if you have a look here, you can see that you have your 3 wraps, and then the thicker weaving wire from the rays goes once around the 3rd wire in the center here, and then back up. It just gives it an extra anchor point. So wrap it around the middle wire once, bring it back, and then attach it back, and then also use the thin weaving wire like I showed you earlier to attach the first base wire of the ray. This just gives it an extra anchor point, and that will then anchor it. And what will happen in between is your weaving wire will break. I've broken it about 3 or 4 times now, just because it's a very tricky design. And if you're not very careful with a very thin 0.3 wire, it'll just snap. So just add the wire back in as you're working on it, and you know, you can just cut the ends off and you won't hardly notice it. So now, once you have attached the first pyramid, what you need to do is you need to try and make sure, obviously, that it's centered. So each time we are tying the pyramid to the base of the prongs, you need to make sure that it's lined up with the prongs at the point of attachment. And then the next step after that, what we need to do is continue with the pyramid. So it's going to be a little bit more tricky, obviously, because we've got all of the wires attached now. So we're going to take the weaving wire and we're just going to push these all together. Try and find a pair of pliers so that I can do this. I'm going to use these. And I'm just going to push it in as much as I can. Obviously just be very gentle so that there's no gap. And then we just need to continue with the pyramid wrap that we've done before, because between each prong we are going to need to add another pyramid. So we're going to do is just continue with this. You're just going to have to take your time and go very slowly. So go around the first wire like that, bring it back down, and then I go around the next wire just like I showed you before. And what I like to do in between to keep it more symmetrical, I like to squeeze the wire down because that will make it more uniform. So each time the wire comes round the base, I bring in a pair of pliers and I flatten it. That will help symmetry. Come around the top like that, and then come in with a pair of pliers. In actual fact, a pair of flat nose pliers would probably be better to do that. That'll help. I think I've gone around the base. And that's the weaving wire from the bottom. So then just continue. And then the important part is that the base wires are kind of lined up parallel. So you don't want to put too much tension on them at all, but enough so that the gap in between each wrap and each base wire is the same as the gap before. Like that. Push these in. Come round again. Like that. And don't worry too much if it's not exactly as uniform as you like it to be at this point in time, because once we pull out all the base wires later, when we are creating the rays, this is all going to be not as important. So just every now and then adjust everything like that. And bring the wire up, and rather than pulling on the weaving wire, bring the base wire down by pushing it. And then flatten the wire like that. Over the top, push these together. Bring this down. Like that. And then obviously you continue. So you get the idea, and this is how we're going to do it. So I'm going to show you next how I'm going to use this wire as well to attach to the base wire. So I'm going to finish that pyramid, and then I'm going to show you how to attach it. Right, okay, so I've created some more weaves for the base and another to finish the pyramid. And I found actually once I'm done with the pyramid, if I wrap the weaving wire around all of the base wires, it kind of keeps them out of the way at the bottom. So it's much more manageable when you then have to create the weaves at the base. Okay, so now what I've done is I filled up the base, and remember also to capture the base wire here on the side so that they held in place. And I've brought the weaving wire out in the middle wire, which is the third, sort of the middle wire of the three in between the prongs. So it's sitting here. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to undo all of this, and we're going to tie the pyramid in place. So open this up, put it out of the way, and I've bent it slightly out of the way, as you can see, so I'm going to just close this off a little bit again so that they sit together. Obviously this makes it fiddly because all the wires are sitting close together, so I'm going to use this weaving wire. So make sure that, and as you see here, I've done 3 wraps around the base next to the pyramid, which I've forgotten to do on this side, which is not great because now the spacing isn't right. So remember to put 3 wraps before and after each pyramid. So now we're going to take the weaving wire and we're going to wrap it. Just make sure that I'm zoomed in here. Going to wrap it around the bottom base wire and be gentle with it. If you pull too hard, it's just going to snap. So just 1, then we come back, go back round. We're going to attach it to the same wire, which is this one here. Make sure I'm zoomed in here. I'm going to wrap it around the same wire once, and then we're just going to continue on to the bottom. You may find you need to jump to the other side and then do another attachment. Right, so now we've got this wire attached, and I found that it's also better if we use this wire from the pyramid to give it an extra attachment point. So I'm going to bring it round from the loop here. We're going to do exactly the same. Just going to find a 3rd wire like that. I'm just going to give it 1 single wrap. Make sure I'm zoomed in here. 1 single wrap around the middle wire like that. Come back and then launch back into the pyramid weave. So I'm going to start with my 3 wraps. 1, 2, so you don't want to have more than that. So you've got your 3 here, and then obviously you just start back up into the pyramid weave, and just make sure that you are pushing these together nicely. That's it. And now you continue. You're going to put these back up. You're going to do the pyramid weave later. I'm just going to put these away for now, like that. And now I'm going to continue with the base weave and finish this off until I've done all of the pyramids in between each section. And then I'm going to show you the next step. So just continue with that. Fill each space in between the prongs and create pyramids as we did before, and do the attachment points. And don't forget to create the wraps in between each pyramid to keep them kind of central. And that's that. Right, so I have now finished attaching this, and I finished all the weaving. So I'm just going to go through the most important aspects. So when you're doing the weave, obviously you must remember to put 3 wraps on the base wire with the thicker weaving wire before and after each pyramid. And then we'll attach it. Let's see if I can get something to point at. Okay, I'll use the needle. So in between each attachment point, it needs to line up with the prongs so that these pyramids are central. Obviously, as I said earlier, they are not wide enough to reach from you know, center points. You need to fill up this space with some coils around the base wire, and I have attached this bit here with the thicker weaving wire of the pyramid weave here, and as well as with the thinner wire of the weave for the base, just to give it extra strength. So that make sure that they all line up, the points with all the prongs. So this is where the attachment point is, because we're going to be bending these panels basically. So, and at each end you're going to finish with 3 wraps with a thicker weaving wire around the base, and 1 wrap of the thinner weaving wire as well, just to keep it attached on each side. And as I said, you know, don't worry if the gaps, you can see here the gaps in between the outer wire is not always accurate. I made a mistake here, so it's a bit wide. It doesn't really matter because you're not going to see that anyway. This is going to be on the inside, the kind of ledge that where the crystal's going to sit on, so it doesn't really matter if, you know, it's not quite accurate. And that's that basically. So the next step is we're going to be bending these prongs, because that's easier to do now that they're attached. So the way this works is we want to bend just the tip of the prong, just so that it goes over a very small area of the crystal. So I'm going to bend it like that. It's easy to do with a pair of flat nose pliers, and we're going to bend just a very tip, and that'll be later on. We'll adjust that a bit more once it's bent over the crystal when the stone is in place, and that's kind of what it looks like. Going to do the same on the other side, obviously, like that. So anyway, you're going to do all of these, and then we're going to move on to the next step. Right, so now I've bent all the prongs, and this wire obviously is going to be bent downwards, but we're going to do that at a later stage. So now the next step, we need to obviously bend these panels into place, but we won't be able to do that unless we remove these wires from the top, because they're holding everything together. So what we're going to do is just pull these out. We're not going to be using these. So obviously these wires can be reused. You don't need to throw them away because they've not been bent or damaged or anything like that. So we're going to take this off as well. I like to use weaving wire to hold the base wires together because it just keeps them out of the way. So how many of these base wires you remove actually just depends, but I like to remove as many as I can. And it gets a bit more difficult as you get towards the bottom, because obviously there's more of the weaving wires holding them in place. So put this out, and I'm thinking I'm wondering if I should just leave one. I think I'll pull, because it'll be difficult to bend with the wires. I may be regretting this, but I'm not sure. I think it'll be fine. So now we've got all of these wires out, and that's what we've got at the moment. So now we need to bend the panels, and that's going to be, not sure how we're going to do that. I just need to think. I think because we need to bend these at an angle, we're going to bring these wires on the outside. I'm going to straighten these out so that they sit up a little bit like that. Obviously, as I said, this wire is going to sit downwards, and then I'm going to bend. I think we're going to start on the inside actually. It's a bit tricky to bend this with the pyramid in the middle. Just kind of need to place your pliers on the side and give it a bend. And the same here. It's a bit tricky to do because you've got, normally you would place your pliers across. I wonder if I use a thinner pair of pliers, but then I don't have, I've got underneath. Yeah, maybe that'll work better. So if you have something thinner, you can come in and use this to create. So you can lift up this weave a little bit. And come in and put the bend in place like that. You want to create panels that resemble obviously the hexagon of the stone. Kind of thing like that. Yeah, it's taking shape. So if you don't have thinner pliers like that, you can just lift that weave a little bit, but obviously be careful not to damage the wires as you do that. It'll be much easier with a round stone because then you can just make this round and you don't need to worry about creating, a shape with sides like this kind of thing. So you need to take your time with this and just work really slowly and bend it as you work and adjust it. So I'm going to keep doing this. When I get to the end, I'm going to come back and show you. I think what I'm going to do with the end bits, I'm going to bend this upwards also on the sides as well. So one more thing is obviously the weave at the end is going to need to fill the space of one of these panels, but because we have wires that we need to work away here, we don't need to have the space filled with weave quite as long, if that makes any sense. That. Bend this down and then bring this up, kind of thing, and then just keep working on it, and then make sure, like I've bent these wires, but this side is a little bit shorter than the other, so you just manipulate it until they fit together like so. And these wires on the inside need to come down. So once I've bent them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press them down like that, because that's the platform obviously where our crystal is going to sit in, so they need to be on the inside like that. Right, so I'm going to fix this up, obviously do the same on the other side. Bring these weaving wires or these base wires down. And then we're going to seat the stone up. Right, I'm going to fix it up, back in a second. Right, so I've tidied it up a little bit more. If I'm perfectly honest, this is probably the most fiddliest design that I've ever done. So if you're never going to watch another one of my tutorials, I fully understand. I apologize in advance. So what we need to do next is take away these inner wires, because obviously they are sitting on the inside. I don't really know what to do with them, so we're just going to cut them off, because what they do is they just serve as a platform for our stone to sit on. So they don't really need to do anything else but just hold the crystal in place. So we can cut these off so that we can join the wires at the top. So I'm going to be doing that, and just obviously you have to be careful when you're shaping them. I've broken a couple of wires on the inside just because it's really fiddly, so take your time with that. So what I'm going to do next is just come in and you can just cut these right off at the end like that. Do the same on the inside. So now we've got actually space to close this off, because they don't really have anywhere else to go but to sit on the inside. So push this in, just check the fit, kind of like that. It doesn't want to stay at the moment, but yeah, you get the idea. So we're going to do, so we need to close off the side, and ideally we'd like to maintain the same sort of spacing at the top that each other panel has. So we're going to push this together and arrange and make sure that the stone fits. Before we're going to tie anything, you may need to adjust the angle of the wires. The aim is to be able to place the stone inside. The prongs will sit over the corner of the crystal like that. There we go. And then push it in. And then the prongs will kind of bend over the corners on the side to hold it in place. Right, so I'm going to do that. And then we're going to be weaving these together at the top. Right, so next we're going to tie these together. So I'm going to place my stones in. I mean, you can obviously remove these later if you wanted to, but it helps to have them in place, because you can bend the prongs open and closed. So you put these in now like that, if it lets me do that. Sometimes it won't let you, so you can actually add these later, because the prongs are obviously bendable, so you can open this up a little bit just so that you can slot the stone in like that. Okay, that fits. And then we're going to close it. So there's no point in adjusting the stone right now. You can do that later once everything is tied off with the prongs and pressing the weaves together. So once we've done that, we need to weave these wires together. So we're going to, if you haven't already, if you've still got wire attached, you can reuse that. Mine kind of broke off, so I need to add in a new piece. So what I'm going to do is grab hold of it. Obviously you add a stone to the back, but I'm going to do that in a minute. You don't have to do that right now. Doing it at the front. So going to just wrap the weaving wire around the first wire once or twice like that. This is just to anchor it. And then what we're going to do, in a manner of figure of 8, we're going to work our way to the back through all the wires. So we want to obviously press this together as much as we want as possible, so that they are lined up. Bend these out of the way, and then just press figure of 8, make a figure of 8 weaves. So we're going to go once full revolution around the front wire, and then we're going to travel across, but we don't go back to the first wire in line. We're going to go to the second wire, and then we're going to go one full revolution around the second wire like that, push it down, and then come back to the second wire on this side. And always press it down. I'm actually zoomed in. And then we're going to go one full revolution around the second wire like that. Always make sure the weave is pushed down. And then we're going to travel across, and as you will imagine, now we're going to go to the third wire on the other side, and it's going to be another figure of 8. And we're going to come back, and we're just going to crisscross back and forth like that. Obviously press the other side together as well until all of these wires are woven together, and then that will hold them in place. Right, so I'm going to fix this up a little bit and finish off the weave, and then we'll move on to the next step. Right, so I've done 2 sets. So I've gone one direction, and then I've gone one set on the way back. So basically there's 2 wraps around each of the wires. Let's see if you can zoom. So that's what it looks like from the top. There's a little inset that will show you what it looks like. Right, so now it's time to adjust the stone. So I've left this one off at the back, so you can see it's quite easy to actually slot them back in, because you can just come in and bend these prongs open a little bit. They're quite sturdy now because they are tied in place, so the prongs should line up with the corners. So we're going to start. The ideal situation is to do one opposite, but like when you're tightening a wheel nut, you're going one side first and then you go across directly opposite and tighten that one down, go here, and then on the other side as well, and then just work your way around. It's obviously not ideal, but probably better with a pair of flat nose pliers because you get more purchase. And obviously be careful not to scratch your stone. You may want to adjust this a little bit, the position. Press these down like that. And if you don't really like the shape of the square, you can also then ever so gently come in. Obviously be careful with that. The prongs aren't tightened down properly yet. And then you can kind of squeeze the base where the stone is seated to kind of hide it a little bit under the stone. Obviously that should come last after the prongs have been tightened properly. But yeah, you get the idea. So that's what it looks from one side, and that's what it looks like from the other side. And don't worry if these rays get beaten up a little bit. They're quite sturdy, actually. So they can handle a little bit of mistreatment. We're going to be working on these in a minute. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit to make sure that the stone sits nicely. And then we're going to work away all of these wires at the top here, and then work on the rays. Okay, so I have now woven this is all fixed up, and the stones are seated. So what you can do is, because the prongs are obviously opposite each other, you can use your pair of pliers to kind of press down on each side, and that will press the stones against the seat that we've created and compress them down like that. So next we're going to work away these wires here. So because we don't have a ray at the top, I'm thinking we could just cut these off and create little swirls. So this is going to be organic, so you're going to have to figure out how you'd like these to look. So I've got my pair of pliers, so I'm going to use these ones. So we're going to, I've got Tronics ones which have got a finer tip, but these ones will do for now. So we're going to create little swirls. Start at one end, and then we can roll these down. We want to create a tight swirl as possible. So you can kind of press this into a little circle like that and make them nice and tight, and then we can kind of roll them down a bit like, if you don't know, if you're from my generation, you may remember those kind of French knitting dolls that had sort of teeth at the top, and you would kind of knit a long sausage which you then rolled into some sort of what do you call it, coaster or mat that you put on the table. Really not very useful, but mums always used to keep them, obviously, because we made them. But that's what this reminds me of. So we're just going to roll this in like that. And the placement of these is obviously up to you. It's just really to work away, you know, the wires that we have, and build up. I'm thinking of maybe building like a triangular sort of shape with these, and doing these on both sides. This one's a little bit short, but that's why it's organic, so I'm going to work this away. So to create these lengths, you've seen here, this was about 3 or 4 centimeters long. So this wire here is pretty long. It'll make a pretty big swirl. So I would cut that down a little bit. Obviously you want them all different sizes, so make that one a little bit longer. And then once we've rolled that one down, we'll arrange these. So some of these will have to have longer stalks than others, so that the swirl will end up here on top. But I'm going to roll these all down, and then we'll arrange them. Right, so I've rolled these all up, and I'll put the lengths that I've cut each wire in the description above, so that you can have a rough idea of how long I've made them to get these the size coil. And for the last wires that we have in the middle, I'm going to cut these off, and we're going to create just a little loop of the same size, and this is just to attach it. So we're going to do the same as we did with the other wires. It's just that we're going to create a simple little loop, so that we can then attach this design to a frame or wherever you want to attach it, like that. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. Now create a loop roughly the same size. I'm going to line these up. Make this round at the end. It's always a little bit tricky to get these round. There we go. Kind of roll it in, and you want them to be roughly the same size, and line them up. So I need to make the one a little bit smaller. Let's pull this out and bend it back. So then they line up like that. Obviously play around with it a little bit. And this is just so that you have a place to put the hook in. So that's what it looks like at the moment. Right, so I'm going to cut these off later, these big wires. We're going to work with these outer wires first. And all we're going to do with these is bend them at an angle. Use a fine tipped pair of pliers like these, or the finest pair you have, because these little prongs are difficult to get into. So just going to grab each and bend it out. It gets easier as you get to the top. You kind of want to graduate them outwards a little bit like that. And this is just to create little bit of a fan shape, and you can adjust these at a later stage. Like that. Nice curvature. Obviously play around a bit with the shape that you have. You can open them a bit wider, so that's what they look like. It's just so that they have a bit more of an open shape rather than this sort of closed, narrow look. Gives it a bit more of detail. So you're going to do this for all of these around, and then at the later stage we're going to roll these wires in. Right, so I've arranged them all the way I want, and these kind of wires are bugging me. We need to work them away, but I don't really know what to do with them, so I think what I'll do is just cut them off and make a really small loop at the end, because we obviously don't want the wires to slip off. So what I'm actually going to start off here with that, like that, and then I'm just going to go around and trim these off like that. And it would actually be better if you had quite fine, I don't know what I've done with them now, but these will do. What you can do is roll the loop in, the wire, and then kind of bend it back like that, and that works it away. I think I'm going to fill the gaps with beads maybe, or something like that, just because it's a little bit empty. But yeah, we shall see. Do the same on the other side, and then we're going to create the outside for this. Right, so I've used some of the 0.3 28 gauge to add some beads, and all I've done is I've pulled them through the lowest of the wires that create the rays, and then I just pull them tight like that, and that will also create more of an equal spacing in between these rays. I've ruined a little bit the look of the rays. You can arrange them again once you're done with that, and then when you finish with attaching the beads, all we're going to do is just kind of find a spot where we can wrap this around to tie this off, kind of thing. And then obviously you'll need to go back in and arrange the rays. Now obviously this kind of design is not great to be worn as a pendant, because these things are pretty delicate, so this is great for the sort of wind charm that we're doing, but as a pendant I wouldn't recommend it, obviously, because these are quite delicate, you know. So all right, so we've finished with this. Gonna tie these off, and now we need to create the circle that goes around it, and then the wind charm itself. Right, so to create a frame, just taking a piece of thick wire. You can use 1.3 or 1.6 gauge, which is I think your 16 gauge or 14 gauge. Find a midpoint, and this is to create the loop at the base. Obviously measure that out. You don't really need a very big loop. And then what I want to do with this is I've got these little swivel hooks, which are perfect for the wind chasers, because they will allow this design to swivel. So I'm just going to hook this in before I close off the loop. You may need to open it up again a bit so it can slide in. There you go. Then close this off again. So that's the hook in place. You don't have to worry about anything later. You can take these off. You just cut them off. So next, take an object that is roughly big enough to hold this design hanging, basically, like this. So I put the dimensions in. So you want this to be able to swivel freely. So then come back in and use an object like that, just to get the initial shape. You'll still have to kind of work, you know, on the shape. This is just sort of roughly the outside, and then we're going to create the inside loop. You're probably going to need to adjust this. I had to come in and, you know, cut off and reshape and cut off some more, that kind of stuff. So just create an initial hook like that, and then we do the same on the other side, but this one is going to sit on top of the first one like that. That one can be a little bit bigger because you're going to attach this to a hook of sorts, and then you just kind of have to, this is a bit skew, but you get the idea. So you have to work around a little bit and kind of get this to sit together. And then we're just going to cut a piece of weaving wire, and all we're going to do is we bind these together with a figure of 8 weave. So once around the base, bring these in, and then we're going to wrap around the other side once. Pull this in. You're going to have to push these apart a little bit. Wrap around the base once, come back to the top wire, wrap it once, and then come back, that kind of stuff. This is just to bind these two ends together. You do this until you have a nice solid connection. So obviously this is a bit messy, but you get the idea. And once these are firmly tied together, you've got more of a, you know, chance to actually shape this nicely. So that's what we've got at the moment. And then just to strengthen it a little bit, you can hammer the wire. So what that does is it strengthens, it work hardens the wire. And if you make it, if you flatten it a little bit, it won't distort as easily, because obviously it's now shaped. So it's better to do this. It's got a lot more strength now when you do that, and once it will hanging in the wind, it'll be nice and sturdy. As I said, this is strong enough for a wind charm, or wind spinner as they're called. Obviously not great for a necklace, but yeah, wind chaser is great. So that's that. Right, so now I'm going to attach a swivel. I've widened it a little bit so that it can hook onto the area here. So I'm going to close this off. That should be okay. And then the other side we're going to hook onto the top here. Hopefully it's short enough. Otherwise I may need to shorten it a little bit. Then hook the star onto the swirl, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. If you feel like joining our artist community on Facebook, I will pop a link to the group below. We're a fun bunch, so feel free to come and join us. I also have social media if you want to follow some short stories that I put up occasionally, and I've got Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, and obviously YouTube. Also a link is below. And last but not least, visit my shop if you're interested in getting some kits for these tutorials, gemstones, beads, wire, and all sorts of other things. So as before, there is a link to all of that in the description below. And that's it from me. Hope to see you next time. Bye.